long, O Lord, have you forgotten? How long, O Lord, have you forgotten me forever? Have you turned your face away while I struggle in the shadows? Day after day, I carry the weight of silence, asking, waiting, hoping for a sign, for a word, for a glimpse of your light. My heart is weary from longing, and still the heavens feel shut. I search the skies, but no answer comes. I speak your name, but the echo is all that returns to me. How long must I wrestle with thoughts that tear at my peace? How long must sorrow make its home in my soul? There are moments when despair whispers that I've been abandoned. Even in this silence, even in this ache, I will not let go of you. Though my prayers seem unanswered and my cries return void, I will still trust in your mercy. I will still sing of your goodness, because even in the waiting, even in the darkness, you are near. So I lift my eyes once more, not because I see, but because I believe, not because I feel strong, but because I trust that you are. And I will keep calling, I will keep hoping, I will keep believing until the silence breaks and your light dawns once again. How long, O Lord? These words come not from a place of casual wondering, but from the depths of a heart weighed down by silence. The speaker doesn't merely question God's absence. They feel it in every part of their being. It is not just time passing without answers. It is the ache of unanswered cries echoing in the chambers of a soul that longs to be heard. There is an urgency in the tone, a yearning that has gone on too long. When someone says, "How long?" it's because they've reached a point where they can no longer keep the question inside. It breaks through their thoughts, through their patience, and spills out as a prayer, as a cry, as a plea. This is not an intellectual doubt about God's existence. It is a relational ache, the kind of ache that only comes when you believe someone is there, someone who cares, someone who once spoke but now seems silent. The kind of ache that only comes when you remember what it felt like to be close and can no longer feel it. The absence of a response becomes heavier with every day that passes. There is no sign, no whisper, no comfort, just the blank sky and the echo of their own voice returning. The feeling of abandonment is profound. It's not just about the external circumstances, though those may be hard enough. It's about the absence of God's presence in the middle of them. Pain is multiplied when it feels like God is not only allowing it, but is distant from it. There is no comfort in knowing that the struggle has purpose, because that purpose is veiled behind the silence. There is no clarity, no direction, only question. And the hardest part of all is the fear that this silence means rejection, that somehow you've been disqualified from God's attention, that perhaps your pain isn't worth responding to, that maybe you're alone after all. But even in the heart of this silence, the speaker does something profound. They speak. They don't remain silent in return. They don't close their hearts or turn their backs. Instead, they lift their voice, however weak, and cry out. They choose to engage God, even if it feels one-sided. And that act, though simple, is filled with courage. It is the courage to be vulnerable, to risk speaking into the void, unsure if there will be an answer, to cry out from the shadows, hoping that God is still listening. There's something deeply human in that. Because haven't we all felt forgotten at some point? Haven't we all wondered why God doesn't act sooner, why he doesn't speak louder, why he doesn't make himself clearer? This is not just one person's story. It is a universal human experience. The silence of God is one of the most painful parts of faith, and yet it's a protest that still believes. It's a complaint that refuses to walk away. It's a cry that comes not from rejection, but from a longing for restored closeness. In this cry there is honesty, raw, unfiltered honesty. There is no pretense here, no religious performance, no carefully worded prayer, just the heart laid bare. And perhaps that is exactly what God is waiting for. Not perfection, but truth. Not polished words, but real ones. Not distance masked by duty, but nearness shaped by need. So the speaker cries out, not because they've lost faith, but because their faith is being tested. Not because they've given up, but because they desperately want to hold on. This is the paradox of spiritual silence, that it can sometimes deepen faith even as it wounds the heart, that in the absence of answers we can still choose to seek the one we believe holds them. And even if the silence stretches further, even if the answer doesn't come right away, there is something sacred about that cry. It is a bridge between pain and hope. The silence stretches day after day, and in that silence questions begin to stir, quietly at first, then louder, more persistent. Doubt creeps in like a shadow at dusk, gradually taking over the light. The speaker, already worn by sorrow, begins to wrestle with thoughts that are not easy to admit. There's an unsettling inner tension, a storm of uncertainty that challenges everything they once held firm. When God feels distant, even the strongest faith can tremble. The heart that once trusted with confidence now feels fragile, unsure if the silence means something has gone terribly wrong. This is the struggle with doubt, not simply an intellectual debate, but a deep emotional wrestling. It's not that the speaker has suddenly stopped believing in God. It's that they no longer feel God's nearness. And in that space of absence, the mind begins to spin. If God is real, then why the silence? If he is good, why does this suffering continue? If he sees, why doesn't he act? These are not questions of rebellion, but of desperation. They come from a heart that wants to believe, but cannot ignore the growing weight of unfulfilled prayers and unseen answers. Every passing moment without a response seems to add weight to the doubt. The speaker begins to wonder, am I being punished? Did I do something wrong? Have I fallen out of God's care without knowing it? And this is what makes the struggle so hard. It's not just about doubting God, it's about doubting oneself. Am I worthy of being heard? Have I been forgotten? This spiritual confusion isn't neat or tidy. It doesn't follow a script. One day the speaker may feel resolved to trust, and the next may fall into despair. It's a back and forth battle where belief and uncertainty wrestle, where light and darkness coexist in the same soul. And the longer the silence lasts, the more space doubt has to grow. Sometimes it feels like faith is barely hanging on, clinging by a thread. Other times the thread seems to snap altogether, and all that remains is a quiet, bitter ache. But even in this dark wrestling, something sacred is happening. The struggle itself means the speaker still cares. They are still seeking. If they truly didn't believe, there would be no conflict, no longing, no pain. Doubt, paradoxically, is a sign of faith under strain. It means the heart is still reaching for something real, even if it can't feel it right now. It means the speaker is still turning toward God, even if only to question him. There is an honesty in doubt that is often missing in surface-level faith. What is especially painful is how alone doubt can feel. Others may not understand. They may offer quick answers or well-meaning encouragement that only deepens the isolation. But the speaker knows this is not something that can be fixed with words. It must be endured, wrestled with, lived through. The questions must be asked, even if the answers take time, sometimes a lifetime, to come. And that's the hardest part, the waiting, the not knowing, the slow erosion of certainty. Yet in the midst of this struggle, there is also a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, God is still listening. Maybe he is not absent but silent for a reason. Maybe the questions are not a sign of spiritual failure but of spiritual growth. Maybe this valley of doubt is not a dead end but a path to deeper faith. Faith that is not based on feelings but on trust. Faith that is forged in fire, not comfort. And so the speaker keeps going. They may not shout praise, but they whisper a prayer. They may not feel strong, but they take another step. And in doing so, they choose to keep the conversation open. Doubt has not won because the speaker is still engaging with God, even if it's through tears, confusion, or frustration. The struggle with doubt is real, raw, and painful, but it is not the end. It is a passage, a place where the soul is tested, shaped, and eventually made stronger. In the midst of silence and sorrow, when the heart is heavy with doubt and the mind clouded with questions, the speaker turns inward and begins to remember. This remembrance is not accidental. It is intentional, a choice made in the darkness to recall what was once known in the light. Recalling God's faithfulness becomes a lifeline, something to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. Even though the present feels empty, the past speaks of a God who was near, who acted, who cared. The speaker remembers stories, not just personal memories, but the ancient accounts passed down through generations. Stories of seas parting for a nation in flight, of food falling from heaven, of enemies defeated not by strength, but by trust in a mighty God. These are not fairy tales or legends. They are testimonies of divine faithfulness. The same God who showed up then is the God the speaker now calls upon. These memories begin to push back against the darkness. They don't erase the pain, but they remind the heart that this isn't the whole story. Perhaps the speaker reflects on moments in their own life. Times when things seemed hopeless, but help came. When prayers once met silence, but answers eventually arrive. When peace was given in place of fear. When healing followed brokenness. When joy returned after mourning. These were not just coincidences. They were acts of divine love. They were glimpses of God's mercy, evidence that He had not turned away. This remembering brings a quiet strength. It is not loud or triumphant, but steady. A kind of trust that builds slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. The speaker may still feel confused, but they are not completely lost. They anchor themselves in what has already been revealed. Recalling God's faithfulness is not just a mental exercise. It is a spiritual discipline. It requires the will to look beyond current pain and fix the eyes on eternal truth. The heart must speak to itself, reminding itself of what it knows but cannot feel. This is why the psalmist often said, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." Not because the soul always felt like it, but because it needed to be reminded. In the same way, the speaker now preaches to their own weary heart. Remember what He has done. Remember who He is. This act of remembering does not deny the pain. It coexists with it. The speaker does not pretend that everything is fine. They simply choose to bring the past into the present, allowing God's history of goodness to speak into today's uncertainty. That memory becomes a seed of hope planted in dry ground. It begins to grow, slowly, perhaps invisibly, but it is there, alive with potential. There is also a communal aspect to this remembering. The speaker is not alone in this journey. Others have walked this road before. Prophets, kings, outcasts, and ordinary people have all cried out in despair, only to later rejoice in deliverance. Their stories become the speaker's stories. Their testimonies become shared faith. In this way, recalling God's faithfulness becomes more than personal. It becomes part of a larger narrative of a God who is always working, even when unseen. And so, while the silence may not yet be broken, and the sorrow may not yet be lifted, the speaker holds on to the truth of who God has been. That truth becomes a promise, a quiet assurance that He has not changed. The silence may last, the struggle may continue, but the foundation remains firm. God was faithful before, and He will be faithful again. This memory gives the speaker the courage to keep praying, to keep waiting, to keep hoping. It does not remove the burden entirely, but it gives strength to carry it. Faith, in its most honest form, does not always feel strong. Sometimes it simply remembers. Sometimes it looks back in order to move forward, and that is where the speaker finds their footing. Not in what they feel right now, but in what they know to be true. In the middle of the silence, in the weight of sorrow, the act of remembering becomes sacred. It is an act of resistance against despair, a way of saying, "I will not forget who you are, even if I don't understand what you're doing." That is faith. Not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to let go of the truth that God has been good and He will be good again. The silence has not lifted. The questions remain unanswered. The weight of sorrow still presses down, and doubt still lingers around the edges of the speaker's heart. And yet, in this moment, the speaker does something both simple and profound. They choose to trust, not because the pain has disappeared, not because the outcome has changed, but because something within them refuses to let go of the belief that God is still good. Choosing to trust in the absence of clear answers is not an emotional reaction. It is an act of the will, a decision born out of both desperation and hope. This trust is not blind. It does not ignore the struggle or pretend that everything is fine. It acknowledges the reality of suffering and the seeming silence of heaven, and still says, "Even so, I will trust you." That choice carries great weight. It is not made lightly. It comes after long nights of weeping, after seasons of spiritual wrestling, after countless prayers met with no immediate reply. And yet, the choice stands. Trust not because of what is seen or felt, but because of who God has shown himself to be over time. The speaker has remembered God's past faithfulness, and now that memory fuels this decision. Though emotions may falter, trust does not depend on feelings. It is rooted in the character of God, in his mercy, his kindness, his promises. And so the speaker makes the choice, not once, but again and again. Each day, each moment of doubt, each step into uncertainty becomes an opportunity to choose trust all over again. It is not a one-time act, but a daily resolve. This trust does not demand immediate answers. It does not place conditions on God saying, "I will trust you if you fix this." Instead, it is open-handed. It surrenders the need for clarity and embraces the mystery of faith. It is a quiet but powerful declaration. "I don't understand, but I believe you are still with me. I don't see the path ahead, but I will follow you anyway." That kind of trust is not weak, it is deeply courageous. It is the kind of trust that grows roots in adversity and bears fruit in the desert. The speaker's trust also reflects humility. There is a recognition that they are not in control, that their perspective is limited, and that they may never fully understand why things are the way they are. And yet, instead of turning away, guide, that he is still listening, even when the silence is deafening. Trusting in God's love means choosing to believe that they are not forgotten, not abandoned, not alone. It means believing that love is not always loud or obvious, but sometimes quiet and steadfast. It means trusting that God is working in ways unseen, shaping something deeper within the speaker, something eternal. And though this trust may tremble, it does not break. There is beauty in this kind of trust. An unpolished, rugged beauty. It doesn't shine with certainty, but with sincerity. It doesn't boast in strength, but clings in weakness. And in that weakness, God meets the speaker. Maybe not in the way they hoped or when they expected, but in a way that is real and deeply personal. Sometimes the very act of trusting becomes the answer. Not a change in circumstances, but a change in perspective. Not an end to the suffering, but the strength to endure it with grace. This trust also becomes a quiet witness to others. It speaks without shouting, testifies without preaching. It says you can be honest with God. You can struggle and still believe. You can have questions and still walk in faith. It opens the door for others who are weary, showing them that trust is not about having all the answers, but about clinging to the one who does. In the absence of clarity, in the middle of pain, the speaker chooses to trust. And that choice, repeated in the quiet corners of the soul, becomes a declaration louder than words, a statement of faith, not the end of the struggle, but the decision to keep walking with God through it. The night has not yet passed. The answers have not come. The burden remains, and the silence of God still hangs in the air. And yet, the speaker does not give up. They do not walk away, do not turn their back on the one they can no longer feel. Instead, they dig deep and find something still burning within them, a flicker, a spark, small but alive. It is persistent hope, the kind that refuses to die, the kind that endures through darkness, doubt, and pain. This hope is not based on how things look or how they feel. It is not tied to circumstances or immediate results. It does not fade with time or weaken with delay. This hope endures, not because everything is going well, but because the speaker believes that what is seen now is not the end of the story. They believe, even with trembling hands and a wary heart, that light will return, that joy will come again, that God has not abandoned them, even if his silence has been long. Persistent hope is not naive. It sees the struggle clearly. It names the pain, it acknowledges the loss, and it does not pretend that everything is okay, but it holds on anyway. It refuses to let go of the belief that God is still working, even in the silence. It is the kind of hope that prays one more time, even when previous prayers seemed unanswered. It is the hope that whispers, maybe today, each morning, and still I will trust you each night. This kind of hope is active. It doesn't just wait, it reaches. It stretches forward. It lifts the eyes toward heaven, even when the sky appears closed. It keeps praying, even when the words are few and the tears are many. It keeps opening the scriptures, searching for reminders of who God is. Not because it always feels encouraging, but because it is the food the soul needs to survive the wilderness. Persistent hope feeds on the memory of God's past faithfulness, drinks from the well of old promises, and chooses to believe that the same God who came through before will come through again. There is a quiet power in this choice. It may not look dramatic, but it is deeply courageous to hope in a God you cannot see, to pray to a God you cannot hear, to trust in a promise that has not yet been fulfilled. This is not weakness, it is strength. Not the kind of strength that conquers armies or silences storms, but the kind that endures the wait, that remains faithful in the in-between. The kind of strength that comes from knowing that even when everything is falling apart, God is still holding all things together. Hope becomes a declaration, a protest against despair. It says, I will not let this darkness define me. I will not let this sorrow be the end. It gives the speaker courage to keep moving forward, even if it's only a small step at a time. It allows them to live with open hands and an open heart, ready to receive whatever God has in store, whether it comes today, tomorrow, or in a time yet unseen. And hope does something else, something deeply human. It connects the speaker to others. Because hope, especially persistent hope, is contagious. When others see someone who continues to pray, who continues to believe in the goodness of God even when life is hard, it plants seeds of courage in them too. It says, if they can hold on, maybe I can too. It creates a community of quiet strength, of people who walk through fire not because they are unscarred, but because they are unwilling to let go of faith. So the speaker hopes, not with loud declarations, not with certainty, but with resolve. They choose to keep praying, they choose to keep showing up, and they choose to keep believing that God is not done, that something is still being written, even now in the silence and the struggle. Hope in this way becomes the last word. Not pain, not sorrow, not doubt, but hope. A hope that refuses to die, that bends but does not break, that whispers through the darkest night, God is still good, and I am still his. That is the anchor, that is the flame, that is the gift of persistent hope.